Kansans are making more money faster than many other Americans. Plus, Democrats are polling well this election season, but even if they win, Kansas could get more conservative. And the nation came to a standstill as a classic case of he said, she said played out on Capitol Hill this week. What does this have to say about our society and future? That's what we're talking about right now on Kansas Week. I'm Pilar Pedraza, and this is Kansas Week. This latest hearing over the Supreme Court nomination of Brett Kavanaugh was a classic he said, she said situation, and really no big surprises from what we heard. A lot of surprises, though, from what it could mean for the rest of us. For more than 9 hours Thursday, Americans were glued to their TV sets, cell phones, and laptops, watching as college professor of psychology, Christine Blasey Ford, detailed the time she says Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh sexually assaulted her, attempted to rape her. She told senators she's 100% sure he was her attacker, that he and his friend laughed at her attempts to fight back. He told senators he's 100% sure it wasn't him, that he's always treated women with respect and helped shepherd the law careers of many women. And after that marathon hearing, senators came back on Friday and voted to give themselves a week delay to send the case to the FBI for some more investigation before they make their final decision. What does all that mean? And what does this entire hearing and the American fascination with it mean about us as Americans, as Kansans? Well, we've got some interesting guests here to help us figure that out. Dr. Neil Allen, political scientist from Wichita State, and we have Adam Catlin from the Wellington Daily News and Travis Mounts from the Times Sentinel papers. Thank you, gentlemen, so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Let's start off with the implications. We now know that it'll be at least, well, up to another week until we have a confirmation vote for Brett Kavanaugh. So this is at the very least delayed. There was a big fight over whether or not to even bring the FBI in on this. What does this mean as far as trying to get another conservative on the court, which of course is really what's at the root of all of this?
Well, as we tape this on a Friday night, it's not entirely clear that Judge Kavanaugh has the votes for confirmation. Particularly because Senator Flake from Arizona has voted to send the nomination to the full Senate, but also is the one who actually insisted on the FBI investigation. And also he's not running for re-election, which is quite important because then he can confront President Trump in a way that other senators would have trouble doing. And so his vote's probably in play, as are a couple of other Republicans. It looks very unlikely that any Democrats will vote for Kavanaugh. So it could have all kinds of implications for how people vote in the fall. Midterm elections are usually about turnout, and the Democratic-based turnout looks like it's going to be pretty good in the fall. Republican-based turnout is entirely unclear as to whether or not what happens this week and next is going to improve Republican turnout or demoralize the Republican base. It's still very much uncharted territory.
I think it'd be really interesting to see that if the Kavanaugh nomination process is derailed, does that anger the right, or does that leave a lot more people resigned and they stay home? I think it's going to just add more energy to the blue side of things. I think you are going to have a lot of upset women over how this thing came across. And going in, I'm not sure.
Yes.
And going in, I'm not sure that there was a way for that Republican side of the committee to not have bad optics, no matter what.
Yeah. Well, and certainly they made their efforts to avoid that, bringing in the prosecutor from Arizona to do the questioning instead of having that optics of a bunch of white men questioning her.
Which then looked like they were ducking.
Yeah.
You know, it was kind of a no-lose situation, yeah. Or no win, yeah.
Well, there was a thing with after the Civil Rights Act was passed in '64 that Lyndon Johnson supposedly said, I just lost the South for at least a generation or 100 years or however long he said. And the question somebody asked in an editorial today was, did the Republican Party just lose women voters for the conceivable future? And that certainly is up for debate with how things were presented on TV screens this last few days.
Well, and you talked about Senator Flake being the one that really has brought us to the point where they decided to delay things for a week and have the FBI come in, because they weren't going to do that. They were going to push for a vote immediately. And he was the one that video came out of a woman just chasing him down and demanding are you going to listen to me? Are you going to look me in the face and tell me that my experiences, my voice doesn't matter? And in a lot of ways, at least for the women that I'm seeing online, on Facebook, Twitter, the ones that are active and that interact with me, that's what they're saying too. Are you really seeing me and our experiences right now?
Well, and also this is a uniquely bad way to have this kind of national conversation that frankly we need to have, and that because of the issues involved, and to resolve this over a lifetime Supreme Court appointment for someone who on the Supreme Court will likely be dealing with issues that do involve issues of sexual politics and equal rights, but all kinds of other things too. And also when the election is coming and President Trump's ability to confirm somebody like Kavanaugh gets weaker every day that passes. So it's a very poor venue to have this kind of conversation, but that's what we're stuck with because of who Trump appointed and the particular allegations that there are against him.
Well, and I think that in this process too, coming out of Thursday, that there are new questions about Judge Kavanaugh's temperament to be on the nation's highest court.
You're jumping my next comment there.
It didn't look good on TV when he lost his composure like that.
Although, that I think for the Republican base, for regular Fox News viewers, and for the significant number of Americans that see there as being a culture war going on and that they are losing their traditional values, I think Brett Kavanaugh played really well to them.
Yeah. Well, look at the support that Lindsey Graham got with his support of Kavanaugh.
Right, and also that Lindsey Graham has a primary election in 2 years, and he's been looking in trouble for that for a while because he's often not a reliably conservative Republican, and so he seems to have found his conservative voice again.
Well, in talking about that, Brett Kavanaugh was seen publicly, at least, up until all of this came out a couple weeks ago, as a fairly safe bet. I mean, former President George W. Bush, not real good friends with President Donald Trump, but he also was out trying to drum up support for Kavanaugh.
But also that's likely because Kavanaugh worked very closely with President Bush. And I think we see here one of the problems that a lot of us have as individuals is that we have trouble thinking that people that we're close to could do horrible things. And I think most of us who have lots of professional contacts now have some situation where someone that we had great relationship with, that was professional, and it turns out that they were behaving in ways that necessitated them losing a job or a status. And so, so if George W. Bush is dealing with Brett Kavanaugh in a professional capacity, that really doesn't have anything necessarily to do with the actions that Kavanaugh took 30 years ago or didn't take in a dorm room. And so, but Kavanaugh though, I mean, that Mitch McConnell was very clear that he wanted somebody else. He thought there are other more confirmable candidates. And also we saw yesterday that Kavanaugh, if you push him up against the wall, he will respond in a very aggressive partisan manner.
We've certainly seen that.
I mean, if you notice, that really hasn't happened before. Even Clarence Thomas, he had some very, very confrontational statements in his prepared remarks, but whenever he was questioned by senators, he was not coming back the way that Kavanaugh did yesterday.
Well, in some comments that I've heard is if Dr. Blasey Ford had reacted the way Kavanaugh reacted to her questions, the reaction to her would have been through the roof. And I think some of that also plays in when you talk about the Anita Hill, Clarence Thomas too, because the whole angry black man metaphor that is out there and that stereotype, he had to avoid that. And I think he, as a black man who had been in the public eye in professional business for quite some time, knew he had no choice but to keep it under control no matter what he was thinking. There are some comments that I have read online saying that this is exactly an example of white male privilege. Only a white man could have gotten away with acting the way Kavanaugh did in that hearing, and still have a chance at confirmation.
Well, it really does, make you stop and look at how society views men versus women and various ethnicities. And, as a white guy who's getting older, I do understand that I don't have the same experiences. And I don't know that. It's hard to put yourself in somebody else's shoes.
But the argument that is out there and that we have to take seriously is the idea that about whether, I guess the question is whether or not standards of burden of proof and evidence and innocent until proven guilty should apply to something like a confirmation hearing, because Judge Kavanaugh is not facing jail time. He's not facing fines. He frankly, if nothing comes out more than what we know now, he probably doesn't lose his lifetime appointment to the appeals court. And so that's where, on one side, people say, well, he's not entitled to this because nobody's entitled to that. But on the other hand, a lot of people see that this is the first time where someone is going to be basically taken down by accusations because they step forward into the public eye like this, and it sets a precedent for the future. And that's often the argument why Kavanaugh has to go forward to a vote, because if you give in to allegations like this, then they'll happen in the future.
I'm going to make this the last comment here, but because we're running out of time, we got to move on. I had one woman comment to me earlier that if Kavanaugh had just said, I don't remember, it was a long time ago, I was a stupid kid, I did stupid stuff, I'm not that same person anymore, I would have no problem. But he absolutely denied everything, and that on top of his attitude, to me, was the issue. And I found that really telling. As Americans, I think we are willing to give people a second chance if they take their mea culpas. No. All right. So, other issues to be talked about today. Based on the polling, it's possible Kansas could be sending 2 Democrats to Washington in November. It's normal for the party not in the White House to make gains during the first midterm of a new president, but that's not the only thing going on here in Kansas.
The people that they're most likely to knock off are also moderate Republicans. And so it's possible that the rural-urban divide in Kansas will become an even more pronouncedly Democratic-Republican divide.
That can clearly be seen in the Kansas races for U.S. Congress. In western Kansas, both Representatives Roger Marshall and Ron Estes are holding comfortable leads. But in eastern Kansas, a different story. Incumbent Republican Representative Kevin Yoder is trailing his Democratic challenger Sharice Davids in the polls for 1 seat, and Democrat Paul Davis is neck and neck with Republican Steve Watkins for the other seat. At the State House, conservative Republicans and Democrats are both expected to grow their numbers, leaving what political analysts like Dr. Russell Arbin Fox call the third leg of Kansas politics out in the cold.
For many decades, the moderate, pragmatic conservative faction, the kind of the liberal Republican faction, moderated that within the state of Kansas.
So despite the possibility of a record number of Democrat wins in November, conservatives also have a chance to take back enough seats to move the state further right.
Republicans are going to remain in an advantageous position for many election cycles to come. And so you might have even more dysfunction, even fiercer battles on the state level than otherwise.
And just Friday, Inside Elections moved the Kansas third, the Yoder-Davids race, to being reliably Democratic. They think they're saying David's going to pull it out, and they moved the Paul Davis, Steve Watkins firmly into a toss-up. So that's continuing to move on as far as the congressional races go. What I find so interesting is the idea that Kansas, despite that upper level of possibly going bluer, is really moving farther to the right in state politics.
Well, I mean, we shouldn't overstate that. So what we had was that in 2016 was the best year for moderate Republicans in recent times. Yeah. And Democrats did pretty well too. And so, although partly because of really poor targeting by the Senate Democrats and leaving alone a couple of Kansas City area Republicans, who barely scrape by. The state Senate is still, well, frankly, there's no working majority in the state Senate.
No.
But in the state House, the moderates and the Democrats have almost a veto-proof majority on most things. That might shift a little bit. Conservatives seem to have taken out about 5, maybe 6 moderates in primaries. Democrats, they may make a bit of gains, but we're still left with basically more or less the same legislature that we have now. But of course, the state could move to the right or the left because the next governor will be either Chris Kobach or Laura Kelly, and they are, frankly, pretty different than the current governor.
Both are very different from the current governor. That is true. As we're talking about what happens with the state house and if it goes more conservative, I'm wondering, are Kansas voters paying a whole lot of attention to the moderate versus conservative Republican conundrum, or are they really focusing on the Republican versus Democrats? What are you guys hearing as you talk to viewers or readers?
Well, I think it's really mostly Republican versus Democrats. I mean, I'm a newspaper editor in Sumner County. It's a very conservative county. I mean, Ron Estes, I mean, he's very popular down there. Anybody conservative. I mean, I called it with Kobach when I was earlier this year, and Kobach won decisively in Sumner County, and he probably will carry Sumner County in November.
Well, if Kobach's not carrying Sumner County, then it's a landslide.
I don't think there's anybody predicting that.
I think the last Democrat to carry Sumner County probably had the last name Docking, and it might not have been the most recent one. But no, I mean, the question is how bad you lose. And on the governor's race, I mean, it looks 50-50 now. The only polls have been Democratic polls, although they all show Kelly ahead by a little.
By 1 point.
And it's telling that, for all the money he has to spend, Orman doesn't have a poll to release, that the Republicans don't have a poll to release. Now, I would still have to say Kobach's still the favorite because it's Kansas and he's a Republican. But it seems very tight. And on the congressional level, I mean, the seats like the 3rd, which is Johnson County, Wyandotte, a little bit of Miami, across the country, they seem to be moving Democratic, not quite as fast as this one in that last poll, but, I wouldn't be surprised if the 2nd and 3rd go Democratic. And actually here in Wichita, 538.com, which is the best election prediction website, they have James Thompson, the Democrat here, is like an 18-19% chance of winning. That's better than, frankly, Democrats have been doing around here in a while.
Thompson's been hitting it very hard. I mean, whether you like him or not, I mean, he's been hitting it very hard.
He has.
Well, and he's really got kind of a method, an MO that is similar to what we have seen in other surprise candidates from the left. Just get out there and talk to people, hit the streets, knock on doors, which is something we most definitely don't see from Ron Estes.
Yeah.
Well, and there are things with his personality that I think can connect with at least some of the Republican voters as well.
Well, and actually, I mean, Thompson is a former Republican, and so I mean, he really is kind of like the voter he needs to get, and he's running a very active campaign, but he's been running an active campaign for like a year and a half now.
Yeah, he basically started as soon as the last election, special election.
He's been to places like Sumner County more than once. I mean, he's not afraid to go places. I mean,
no, and actually, I mean, he's been really pounding Estes, and even publicly in meetings with,
very much so.
And I mean, I think Estes has agreed to 2, maybe 3 debates, and I mean, Thompson wants a debate in every county.
Speaking of those debates, one of those will be here next week on KPTS.
And fireworks.
And also, if I were Estes, I would try to keep debates to a minimum because he's the incumbent. It's a good district. Also, he's not much of a natural debater, and Thompson's a litigator, a trial lawyer. And so, but although if the Democrats are winning this district, even with a decent candidate Thompson, then they're looking at 45, 50, 55 seats nationwide, and we're looking at a really Democratic year.
Okay, I'm going to move from the congressional race to the gubernatorial race. You mentioned how tight it is. Well, it really is a nail biter right now. So to help you decide, the top 3 candidates sat down for one-on-one interviews with KPTS's Victor Hogstrom. Here's a sneak peek at some of what they'll talk about.
The surrounding states around Kansas do not allow illegal aliens to gain welfare and other public benefits. In Kansas, we do. One of the laws I would propose would be to deny welfare benefits to illegal aliens. Another thing we do in Kansas is we give illegal aliens in-state tuition. That's a huge incentive to stay in Kansas, and it may be an incentive to come to Kansas.
You are a Democrat, I am.
And if elected governor, you'll be working with a House of Republicans.
And a Senate of
And a
Republicans.
Senate of Republicans, too, that's
Exactly.
correct. How do you plan to get your goals accomplished as governor?
Well, the same way I always have, which is reaching across the aisle. That's sort of my trademark, is that since day one, I have worked very closely with Republicans to forge good public policy. I was a math major when I went to college, so I can add. And, the most Democrats we've ever had in the Senate have been 10. It takes 21 to pass a vote. So I immediately went across the aisle.
I really want to represent the people of Kansas. And to me, that's what being politically independent is about. It's about putting your state and your country ahead of a political party. It's about using facts and common sense to solve problems, not clinging to rigid ideologies. And ultimately, it's about being free from the obligations to party bosses, to special interests, to corporations, so that you can independently represent the people of Kansas.
Now, Victor also asked them some questions that never come up in debates or speeches. It's a chance to get up close and personal with each of the candidates. See these 30-minute interviews over the next 3 Thursday evenings at 7:30 p.m. It's Chris Kobach on October 4th, Laura Kelly on October 11th, and Greg Orman on the 18th here on KPTS Channel 8. Now, as we were listening to that, one thing that just kind of stuck out to me is this is the same thing we've heard from each of these candidates over and over again. They're kind of hitting some of their main points. What is it that voters want to hear that's going to separate one candidate from the others? Let's start with you, Travis.
It just depends on the voter. There's such a split nationwide, and I think we're still a very red state, but we've got some big divisions.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of space between the red majority and the blue minority in this state. So I would think that Kobach's playing with fire anytime he's talking about cutting education costs again. Mm-hmm. That's what pushed us to a more moderate state house in 2016, and to go back to where we were during that stretch. I think that's a very dangerous move in a race that is so close.
Okay. Adam?
Well, just from a local perspective, I think when President Trump comes to Topeka next month, I think that's going to help Kobach, especially in Sumner County, because President Trump, he's still very popular in Sumner County. And when Kobach's going to be seen with him, that's really going to appeal to the diehard Republican base, the conservative branch, and they're going to love that. And that's really going to help. It's going to, in a lot of circles in this state, that's going to help him.
All right. Neil?
Yeah, so, but it's, I think a lot of the question is about how viable Orman is. And so, he's accomplished a lot in the fact that he's actually getting half an hour on statewide public television. Almost no independent candidates gets anything like that. But his polling has not been terribly good. And, and if he's polling around 9-10%, Kelly's got a real good shot. If he's polling at 15-20, then Kobach is golden.
Yeah, right now his populist message doesn't seem very popular.
No.
Okay, well, we've got some good news and some bad news for the guys who are running, guys and ladies who are running for governor. Taking a look at that, Walmart is warning that the deepening trade war with China will start costing you extra money at the store. In a letter to the Office of United States Trade Representative, Walmart said proposed tariffs on China would force it to increase prices by 10 to 25% on items as varied as car seats and cribs to backpacks, hats, and bicycles. The letter added, for lower-income families, a 25% tax on these items would be a serious burden on household finances. Even warning some families could begin buying secondhand car seats or other baby products, sacrificing safety due to increased costs. The United States is scheduled to increase tariffs on $200 billion worth of Chinese imports Monday, a second increase in tariffs this year. China retaliated with increased tariffs on U.S. goods the first time and promises to do so again this time. And all of that means less spending money for folks who are trying to make ends meet. And really in Kansas, there's still a feeling that we're not in a very good economy right now, right?
Well, also that I think we fit the national pattern that even though economic growth is good, actually at the best in some time, wage growth is still lagging behind. And also a lot of us remember 2008, 2009, and that's left a lot of scars.
Okay. Well, you talked about wage growth. Feels like it's not coming back, and yet the latest numbers show that Kansas is actually doing pretty well on wage growth, growing faster than wages in most other states. The U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis says Kansas workers' paychecks grew by nearly 5% in the last quarter, on top of a full 5% increase the quarter before that. That's the 10th biggest jump in the country and bigger than the national average. According to WIBW-TV, Governor Jeff Collier says Kansas wages grew faster than all 6 of the other Great Plains states. The report tracks personal income by looking at combined earnings, property income, and transfer receipts. So, more money coming in, but the real question when I look at that report is Kansas really doing better, or are we just kind of catching up for as far behind as we were 4 or 5 years ago?
I think that's it right there, is that we lagged so far behind for so long that at some point we get drug along, on everybody else's coattails. And so, yeah, some of it is just trying to be where everybody else has been.
I know a lot of farmers that I've spoken with are concerned. They're kind of keeping a cautious eye on it because they are politically inclined to support President Trump. But at the same time, they are a little worried about what the trade war with China is going to do to them, because they're going to be one of the first ones hit, and now consumers.
Well, and also that if you think about it, in Kansas, we are a very trade-dependent economy. And, not just buying the cheap stuff at Walmart, but also we're an exporter of airplanes. We make so much more food than the people of Kansas and even all of our animals could ever eat.
I don't know. Some of mine will try me on that.
But so if we get in trade war with China, this is the part of the country that'll feel the pain, because China buys a lot of stuff from us, and we buy lots of cheap stuff from them, and we have a very productive relationship with them. And there are other concerns, but if we're in a trade war with China, we're already seeing it now. Soybean prices are down, corn's down a little. And it could get a lot worse.
Yeah, you could argue that we are in that trade war already.
Oh yeah, it just intensified to it.
It just could get uglier.
Yeah. Are you hearing folks in the Cheney and in the Wellington areas talk about this at all?
Not really, no.
It hasn't quite.
Not
it hasn't
yet.
hit the pocketbooks
That's
yet.
right.
It's more fear than actual pain right now.
And also farmers, if they're in the farm program, particularly if they grow soybeans, they are likely to get some kind of payment, and so that will ease the pain somewhat. Although I don't think those farmers were voting for increased welfare state payments when they voted for Trump.
Yeah. So I'm sure the trade war will come back up again on this show. Thank you, gentlemen, so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Neil, Adam, and Travis, I really appreciate your input. I hope that you as well have enjoyed our conversation today. I do want to give you guys a programming note. We won't be here next week, so you can get a live debate between the candidates for the Congressional 4th District, incumbent Representative Ron Estes and challenger James Thompson. But we'll be back on October 12th with a special in-depth analysis of the current midterm elections here in Kansas. For now, have a great week.